Hi, my name is Stephanie Merson, and this is my final project for EDFN 604. As you can see, I added a lot to my mind map from the original one. I've learned a lot about the job that I work, which is crazy that I didn't know this before. But before I get into what I've added to my mind map, I do have to say that I feel really grateful to understand this a little bit better. I know I don't know everything, but when I hear news stories, particularly right now, about funding being withheld at the federal level based on things that we're going to be doing at the state level, I feel a lot more comfortable having conversations and understanding what is going on right now when it comes to reopening schools. So I feel really grateful at this exact moment in time to understand this a little bit better. So let's talk about what I added to my mind map. I'm going to zoom in so we can see it a little bit better. So before we talk about how education works federally, at the state level and the local level, I think it's important to kind of center ourselves on the purpose of education. So a little history. The 17th century, when public schools began, the purpose was really all about getting students able to read and write surrounding religion, right? They wanted students to be able to read their Bibles. And then in the 18th century, the religious studies was still the purpose. Schools were either private or religious. Many schools were turned into private academies that were still around today. In the 19th century, the purpose was education for all. There was a push for everybody to get education. There was increased state involvement at this time, and then by the end of the century, grade levels were organized, and there was laws put in place in 34 states that students had to go to school till a certain age. In the 20th century, their purpose was really workforce. It was very teacher-centered and based on the needs of employers, trying to get students ready to work in factories. And then we also have desegregation, which we have the Brown versus Board of Education. And then in the 21st century, right now, there are multiple purposes. I'm sure that people in the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries believe that there were multiple purposes for education. But because we're in the 21st century right now, it's really hard to have that hindsight to see like the overwhelming or major purpose. So it really just depends on who you ask. We're going to talk about it in a second. But right now, the focus is on technology, project-based learning, collaborative learning, and it's very student-centered. So, kind of some of the overwhelming purposes right now that we see, and David Larrabee's wrote about three of them. The first one was to prepare students to become future citizens, and you'll hear this from educators, politicians, and parents. The second one was to prepare students to become future workers. You'll hear this from business owners and politicians. And then the third one is to prepare students to compete socially, and you'll hear this purpose coming from parents and community members. So you see there's lots of purposes for education, and I don't think that there's any one perfect purpose or right purpose. I think there's lots of purposes for education. So it just really depends on who you're asking and in what area of the country or state or whatever you are at. So now that we kind of figured out the purpose of education, I want to talk about how different levels of the government affect education. I linked, before I even started writing about the federal, the state, and the local level, I really feel like most of the things that we read, whether it was about government, whether it was about the other influences globally or civil society or any of those things, I really feel like a lot of what I heard put people on two sides. You were either considered, or your policy was considered, or the way that you felt things should be in education was considered culturally conservative, and that there should be these ideas of having American exceptionalism, or on the flip side, you are kind of align yourself with having liberal culture values, and you believed in multiculturalism. So I linked that to the government, and I also linked it to each level. So I linked cultural conservatism to the federal level, the state level, and the local level, and I linked liberal culture values to the federal level, the state level, and the local level. And I think you see that's where a lot of the issues come up, because people believe that they're on this end of the spectrum. They really believe what they believe, and it's really hard for them to see the other person's side. So at the federal level, there's nothing in the Constitution that talks about education. So federally, they don't have a lot of authority. But they do have the U.S. Department of Education. They can create federal policies and regulations, but since they can't force it on the states, they just attach some money to it or some kind of incentive. And so most states take it because they need money. And so we have the Department of Education, and right now we have the U.S. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. I believe that out of the 11 or 12 secretaries of education, I think there was 4 that have been actual teachers in the education world. So I think that is an interesting thing to keep in mind. At the state level, this is really where education policies get enacted. So at the state level, we have governors, the State Department of Education, and the Board of Education. And they set policies for states. They create the standards, the curriculums, graduation requirements, teacher qualification requirements, and statewide assessments. And so I use Pennsylvania as my example. We have Governor Wolf, the Department of Education, our Secretary of Education, who is Pedro Rivero. He was nominated by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. And then we have the Board of Education in Pennsylvania. It's 21 members total. 17 were appointed by the governor with advice and consent from the Senate. And then we have 4 from PA's General Assembly that kind of do both jobs. And then at the local level, we have mayors, school board, superintendents. They're the ones who have to do whatever the state says they have to do, right? So they have to figure out what type of curriculum aligns with the standards. They have to make sure that students meet graduation requirements. They have to make sure that teachers are qualified. They have to get students ready for the statewide assessments like the PSSAs in Pennsylvania. So I use my school district as my local example, Central Bucks School District. And I have the taxpayers, the school board, and the superintendent all linked to that. And then underneath the superintendent, we have the principals, assistant principals, and teachers, support staff, and then students. At the local level, it can be organized in a few different ways. So the first way is dominated, which means one person or one group has a ton of influence on the community. This is typically in small towns or urban areas. The school board and superintendent have to kind of fall in line with whatever that dominating group is. Pluralistic is when a local government is organized with having several groups competing. There's no one dominating group. This is typical of upper middle class suburban school districts like the one that I work at. Board members are going to represent many different groups, and superintendents kind of have to act more like an advisor to the board. We have the inert organized system, which means there's no visible power structure. This is typical in rural communities where they can't find people to even fill those school board positions. The superintendent has a lot of power over decision making. And then we have the factorial organizational model, where 2 groups are really competing. It can be many different groups, but many times it's religious groups. It can be political groups as well. School boards control can be changed depending on who's elected or who's in those positions. And superintendents have to play politics, and they have to cater to both sides. So now that we have a better understanding of what education looks like at each of the levels, I wanted to talk about funding. All right. So before I go into Pennsylvania, I found this graph to be really helpful that you included in your presentation about Pennsylvania. And so it really is, it's a pie graph that lays out what percentage of money comes to schools. So we have schools should get around 45% of their money from the local revenue, 8% from the federal revenue, and then 47% from the state. So if I break that down, the federal level, I already said that it attaches policies to funding. So they don't give a ton of money, but they do give, a bunch. And then at the state level, we have gets their money from taxes and lotteries, and the prior year determines the budget for the following year. So if you had a really good year, if your state had a really good year economically, you'll have more on your budget the following year. There's lots of criteria, but one of those is attendance. And then locally, they get their money from local taxes and fundraisers. I've seen that in my own. I live in my district, so my taxes go to my district. And I've also been a part of fundraisers to help raise money for different things in my own school. I found this really cool graph from my own school district and kind of broke down local revenue data. But what I thought was the most particularly interesting was this graph up here. It kind of lays out exactly how much money we got. This is from the 2018-2019 school year. What percentage. So federally, we got 1% from the federal level, 21% from the state level, and then 78% from our local level. And then it takes that local level and it broke it down how much money we got from different things. So you'll see 81.7% was from taxes, local taxes. So then if we look at Pennsylvania particularly, I also found, scroll down a little bit. I also found this graph that you included really interesting. So it broke down Pennsylvania's school funding formula. So 57% coming from local, 34% coming from the state, 3% coming from federal, and then 6% coming from other. Pennsylvania is considered inequitable. We ranked 9th in overall spending. We spend about $5,000 per student per year. Excuse me. Most of the money goes to salaries and benefits for teachers and staff. We are so dependent on local money in Pennsylvania. And because we have so many school districts, that one school district could have a ton of money, and then their neighboring district across the street may have very little money, leading to very different educational experiences to students who could be considered neighbors. I tried to find a graph of another school district that was local to me that was similar to this, but I couldn't find any comparable. But I do know, just based off of what I know about other districts and from friends who work in other districts, that I can go 10 minutes down the road, 15 minutes down the road to a school in Quakertown School District and see very different educational experiences for students. PA uses the fair funding formula and attendance to figure out how much money districts get. And then other funding can come from a bunch of different places, and one of those is civil society, which I will get into in a second. All right, so when it comes to influencing education, there is a lot of groups that influence what education looks at. So I'm going to start with global influences. So there are many organizations that measure academic success and influence education globally. So two big ones are OECD and IEA, and they are organizations that produce tests like the TIMSS, the PEARLS, and the PISA that compare countries' educational systems. When these results come in, everybody jumps to make changes based off of those because we want to be the best country and we want to have the strongest students. Other global organizations are the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and they really push a social justice curriculum that focuses on human rights and peace education. Their goal is to use education as a solution to end world poverty. Then we have the World Bank, which is an individual agency of the United Nations. They hand out educational loans to developing countries. So they are, giving money to people who need it, to educational systems that need it. Then we're going to look at civil society, and they influence education a lot. So I'm going to go through the list. We have teacher unions. They were originally created to improve teachers' pay and working conditions. We have the NEA, and then in Pennsylvania we have the PSEA. We have professional organizations. They were created to serve their specific purpose. So we have the American Educational Research Association, and they're going to focus on what they believe is the most important thing in education. We have think tanks who are support people who are doing research and writing policy, and they hope to influence public thinking, which could then change education. So here's the example of a think tank, which is the Progressive Policy Institute. We have foundations, and they give financial support to projects that are underway or to begin projects, and they also hope to influence public thinking in the way that think tanks do. And an example is the Heritage Foundation. We also have special interest groups. These are any kind of group that has like a special interest or an idea that they want to push. We have businesses, animal rights groups, religious groups, environmental groups, liberal and conservative groups, gun control groups. There's so many different types of special interest groups, but two of the major ones that play a role in education are the Christian Coalition of America, which pushes anti-abortion, anti-gay kind of curriculum. And then we have People for the American Way that push multiculturalism and equal rights when it comes to curriculum. Okay, so the next one I'm going to talk about, and I linked this to influences, but I also linked it all the way over to for-profit educational services. I know that that's where it was under in our group. As I read, I really feel like textbook publishing companies have a lot of influence over education, so I linked it to that as well. So two of the major Texas and California are two of the major states that buy textbooks, and then they get pushed out to everybody in the entire state. They don't have school districts picking curriculum like we do in Pennsylvania. So they have the Texas Board of Education, and they have a state review process where panel members get to choose textbooks for the entire states. And when these textbooks are chosen, a lot of other states end up adopting the same textbooks because it goes through such like a serious review with panel members. But what we read about is that a lot of times these panel members, they get really heated. They end up getting very like religious debates and political debates about what should be included and what should not be included in curriculum. So whatever textbooks Texas ends up choosing, a lot of other states follow suit. And then we have California, who kind of opted to do something a little different more recently,